If your army doesn't want to fight, you don't have an army. You have uniforms, and by 2026, that is quietly becoming one of Russia's most dangerous problems. Not because Russian forces can't fire missiles, they still can. Not because Russia can't recruit, it still can. But because the human system underneath the war is showing signs of something breaking: willingness. Russia can threaten borders, it can mobilize budgets, it can punish dissent, but it cannot manufacture belief at scale forever. And belief is what keeps men moving forward when the battlefield stops looking survival. Over the past year, Ukrainian officials and Ukrainian media outlets have highlighted a trend that matters more than most map updates: rising numbers of Russian soldiers captured and rising claims of surrender, including through a Ukrainian-run hotline and messaging program that offers surrender instructions and promises humane treatment under international law. One part of this story is psychological warfare. Another part is pure economics. And the ugliest part is what it implies about Russia's recruitment base, morale, and command culture as the war drags deeper into 2026. Because the most dangerous moment for any war machine isn't when the enemy advances. It's when the war machine starts trying to escape itself. Surrender isn't just something that happens when a battle goes wrong. It's a diagnostic. It reveals how soldiers actually assess their chances of survival, how much confidence they place in the people commanding them, and whether the state still has the credibility to convince them the mission is worth the cost. And that's where Russia's problem begins, because surrender is no longer appearing randomly. It's being shaped. Ukraine isn't simply waiting for exhausted troops to drift into captivity. It has tried to make surrender operationally possible, even for soldiers deep on the front line, by providing instructions, communication channels, and reassurance designed to cut through fear at the moment it peaks. The effort most often referenced publicly is known as "I Want to Live," a surrender outreach initiative promoted through Ukrainian official messaging and widely reported by Ukrainian outlets. Its promise is straightforward. Those who surrender will be treated under the Geneva Conventions, receive basic care, and may eventually be returned through prisoner exchanges. That offer matters because it exploits a fundamental asymmetry of modern war. On one side is a system that demands obedience while offering no guarantees of survival. On the other is an exit that promises legality, food, medical care, and contact with family. Even if only a small number of soldiers act on that option, its existence alone reshapes behavior. Once surrender becomes imaginable, once it stops being unthinkable, it spreads quietly through units. A soldier doesn't need to be inspired to fight. He needs to believe there is no alternative. Ukraine's strategy is to undermine that belief. And once it cracks, Russia's manpower advantage stops functioning as strength. It turns into a liability, because every soldier who doesn't fully believe in the mission becomes a potential break in the chain. The most uncomfortable truth in this war is that motivation isn't evenly distributed. While committed soldiers exist on both sides, much of Russia's force is increasingly drawn from people with limited alternatives, men recruited through economic pressure, mobilization orders, prison contracts, or promises made to foreign volunteers. Across Ukrainian official statements and reporting, the pattern is consistent even when precise figures vary. Russia is pulling manpower from vulnerability faster than it can generate conviction. That matters because soldiers who don't believe in the mission fight differently, with less trust in command, higher stress under pressure, and a greater willingness to look for exits when survival feels uncertain. This isn't a moral judgment, it's a mechanical one. A modern army relies on human endurance as much as equipment, and in a prolonged war, fear compounds faster than loyalty. If Russia's campaign increasingly depends on soldiers who don't believe in it, then its most dangerous enemy isn't NATO or Ukraine's weapons, it's fatigue. At first, Russia tried to solve manpower with money, contracts, bonuses, promises of status, and for some, especially in poorer regions, that worked. But in a long war, cash has a ceiling because it doesn't buy safety, training, leadership, or survival. And once soldiers realize that, the pitch collapses. That's where surrender enters the war, as a system failure, where Ukraine widens the path out and Russia tries, increasingly desperately, to seal it. Once you see surrender as a system problem, the question changes. It's not how many surrendered, it's what kind of army produces surrender as a trend. Because the answer points directly at how Russia is fighting, how Russia is recruiting, and why some Russian units are starting to feel less like professional formations and more like pressured labor. And that's where the story gets darker. There's a reason surrender is accelerating now, not earlier in the war. It isn't ideology. It isn't propaganda alone. It's the environment. The modern battlefield in Ukraine is designed to exhaust humans psychologically before it kills them physically. By 2026, the front is no longer dominated by maneuver. It's dominated by exposure. Drones don't just kill, they watch. Artillery doesn't just destroy, it waits. Mines don't just deny ground, they erase certainty. For a soldier on the line, the most terrifying part isn't the explosion, it's the waiting. You wait knowing you're visible. You wait knowing your movement will be detected. You wait knowing that when something hits, you may never see it coming. This environment punishes hesitation and obedience at the same time. Russian command culture compounds this. Orders are often rigid. Adaptation is discouraged, retreat is punished. So a soldier is caught between two threats: disobey and risk punishment, or obey and risk annihilation. In that context, surrender stops looking like betrayal. It starts looking like a rational exit. Ukraine understands this, and it tailors its psychological messaging to moments of maximum vulnerability after failed assaults, during encirclements, in areas saturated with drones. That's when fear peaks, and fear spreads faster than orders. A professional army absorbs stress downward. A brittle army pushes stress onto the lowest ranks. Russia's military structure, particularly among hastily formed or undertrained units, often does the latter. Officers are insulated. Orders are top-down. Initiative is punished when it fails and ignored when it succeeds. That creates a fatal dynamic. Soldiers feel disposable, and disposable soldiers don't sacrifice themselves for abstract goals. They look for exits. This is where surrender becomes contagious. One soldier surrendering doesn't just remove a rifle from the fight, it removes confidence from everyone watching. It tells them pressure can end. Obedience isn't the only path. Survival is still possible. That's why Ukraine doesn't need mass surrender for this strategy to work. It only needs enough to normalize the idea. Once surrender becomes imaginable, discipline has to work twice as hard to keep men in line. And discipline is expensive, psychologically and logistically. Russia can threaten punishment, but punishment requires enforcement. And enforcement requires officers willing to be present. That's a bottleneck Russia keeps running into. Here's the part most people still underestimate. Surrender doesn't just remove soldiers from the battlefield, it reshapes the battlefield. Every captured or surrendering soldier carries three things with them: knowledge, momentum, and narrative. Individually, none of those are decisive. Collectively, they are corrosive. Start with knowledge. Even a low-ranking infantryman knows something. He knows which units rotate late. He knows which sectors lack supplies. He knows which commanders are reckless and which ones hesitate. He knows how long training actually lasted, how many replacements arrived, and how many never did. That information doesn't need to be classified to be useful. It only needs to be consistent. Patterns matter more than secrets. When dozens, then hundreds, then thousands of soldiers repeat the same details from different parts of the front, Ukrainian planners don't just get anecdotes, they get confirmation. They learn where Russia is brittle. They learn which assaults are rushed, which units are exhausted, which areas are being held together by threats rather than cohesion. And that feeds directly back into how Ukraine plans its defenses. Surrender quietly sharpens the knife. There's a reason this dynamic hurts Russia more than Ukraine. Russia is the attacking force. Attacking armies need momentum. They need pressure. They need belief that pushing forward, even at cost, will eventually produce results. Surrender attacks that belief. Every soldier who gives up reinforces a dangerous question in the minds of those still fighting. If he stopped, why am I still here? That question doesn't need an answer to be disruptive. It just needs to exist. For defensive forces, time favors survival. For offensive forces, time favors doubt. Ukraine can absorb pauses, Russia can't. Every stalled assault becomes another opportunity for hesitation to spread, and hesitation is lethal to offensive operations. Russia still invests heavily in propaganda, trying to project inevitability and endurance. But propaganda only works when it aligns with lived experience, and on the front line, that alignment is breaking. A soldier doesn't need telegram to lose faith. He loses it when men disappear from his unit and aren't replaced, when wounded troops are sent back into combat, when he learns that surrender didn't mean execution. Those realizations spread quietly, without slogans or broadcasts. And once they do, propaganda stops shaping behavior. Fear becomes personal. Trust erodes laterally between soldiers, not just from the top down. That kind of collapse is dangerous because it doesn't look dramatic. There are no open revolts, no refusals, just slower movement, less initiative, fewer risks taken. On paper, the army still exists. In reality, it stops exploiting opportunities. On paper, Russia has options. It could improve living conditions, invest in leadership, or rotate units more frequently to reduce burnout. In reality, each of those fixes demands resources the system is already running short on. Better conditions require logistics that are stretched thin. Better leadership requires trust, initiative, and decentralization, qualities the current command culture resists. Meaningful rotations require manpower that simply isn't available. So instead of reform, the system defaults to control. Pressure replaces confidence. Fear replaces loyalty. Discipline becomes less about cohesion and more about compliance. That approach can suppress surrender for a time, but it comes at a cost. Because soldiers who stay in line out of fear don't fight harder, they fight until the minimum requirement is met. And armies built on fear don't collapse all at once. They erode quietly from the inside out. At this point, surrender stops being a symptom. It becomes a force multiplier for Ukraine and a liability Russia has to plan around. And once an army starts planning around the possibility that its own soldiers might quit, everything else shifts. Because the next question isn't about morale anymore, it's about sustainability. This is where the story stops being about morale and starts being about math. Wars don't end because one side feels bad. They end when one side can't replace what it loses fast enough to keep pressure on the front. And this is where Russia's surrender problem collides with something far more dangerous: attrition. Russia's war model depends on a brutal assumption that manpower is functionally infinite. That assumption is now breaking. Every soldier who surrenders isn't just one less rifle on the line. He represents lost training time, lost money, lost logistics, and lost momentum. And unlike casualties, surrenders don't create martyrs. They create questions. Questions spread faster than fear. Manpower problems don't exist in isolation. They stress everything else. Supply chains stretch further to support unstable units. Medical systems clog with wounded who can't rotate out properly. Commanders spend more time preventing collapse than planning success. At that point, the war becomes reactive. Russia isn't choosing where to apply pressure. It's reacting to where pressure hasn't yet broken. That's not strategy, that's damage control. Wars often reach a point where recovery becomes theoretical rather than practical. Russia is approaching that threshold, not because it lacks weapons, not because it lacks money, but because it lacks reliable human capacity to turn those resources into sustained offensive action. Once that trust is gone, between soldier and state, between unit and commander, it doesn't return quickly. It fractures, and fractured armies don't regain initiative. They survive until they can't. At this stage, surrender isn't just a symptom of fatigue. It's a strategic accelerant. It speeds up exhaustion. It magnifies mistakes. It turns manpower into a liability rather than an advantage. Which raises the final question. If Russia can't sustain pressure and Ukraine can afford to wait, what does that mean for how this war evolves next? This is the moment wars quietly turn, not with a surrender ceremony, not with a dramatic collapse, but with a shift in objectives. Winning stops being realistic. Surviving becomes the goal. That's where Russia is drifting as this war moves toward 2026. And mass surrender is one of the clearest indicators that the shift is already underway. From the Kremlin's perspective, this war was never meant to be long. It was supposed to be decisive, fast, and controllable. A campaign that reshaped Ukraine before resistance hardened and before costs accumulated. Instead, Russia is trapped in a conflict that punishes delay more than defeat. Every month the war continues, the pool of soldiers willing to fight shrinks. Every new recruitment push reaches further down the social ladder. Every mobilization wave increases avoidance, desertion, and surrender. This creates a strategic bind Putin can't escape. Ending the war without gains looks like failure. Continuing the war deepens the very problems that make victory impossible. So the war drags on, not because it's working, but because stopping it is politically dangerous. Casualties can be framed as sacrifice. Surrender can't. A dead soldier disappears from the narrative. A captured one speaks. He tells his family, he tells other soldiers, he tells the internet. And every story chips away at the illusion that the war is controlled, justified, or survivable. That's why programs like I Want to Live matter far beyond the battlefield. They don't just remove soldiers from combat. They remove fear as the only option. Once soldiers believe there's a way out that doesn't involve death or prison, the entire logic of coercion breaks. Russia can still inflict damage. It can still launch attacks. It can still hold territory. What it's losing is something far harder to replace: control over its own force. When surrender becomes normalized, when avoidance becomes rational, when escape becomes visible, the war stops being about who has more resources and starts being about who can endure longer without breaking internally. Right now, that advantage doesn't belong to Moscow. And unless something fundamental changes, Russia's biggest enemy going into 2026 won't be Ukraine's weapons. It will be the growing number of its own soldiers who no longer believe this war is worth dying for.